desperately need this hour of daily credit.
Well, just to let you know, at the end, I have it on my phone, I'll let you know what the course number is, and you can hand it to the bar and everything.
Perfect.
So you'll be,
Great.
you'll be all prepared.
Probably should have brought a piece of paper to write a
You
note.
take that, you take this sign-in sheet, you can use it as pens, please, and I will hand it to you at the end. Okay, so, right, so the title of the class is really Beyond Dog Eat Dog. The reason I chose this is because I want to show that the business world, as everybody knows, is a dog-eat-dog world, very difficult, a lot of pressure and competition, and the Torah's view is a little bit different than that. So here's the preamble to the Florida State Constitution. It says as follows: "We, the people of the state of Florida, being grateful to the Almighty God for our constitutional liberty, in order to secure its benefits, perfect our government, ensure domestic tranquility, maintain public order, and guarantee equal civil and political rights to all, do ordain and establish this Constitution." Which basically, if you would break this down into a very short sentence, would say that the point of the Constitution is to make sure that we can benefit from the state of Florida in a proper way. It's to be able to uphold things that they feel are important. But essentially, that's it. It's sort of to have a well-run society that people like get along and make it fun. But again, that doesn't necessarily stop people from having this, well, I'm out there, you're out there, and I'm going to make sure that I get ahead of you and push you down because you're my competition. And I need to make sure, like I remember there was on H.com, they have these very quick videos about all sorts of different things, bringing them from, the public sector, movies, TV shows, etc. And there was one about a guy who was in a very competitive internship. I think it was at Ernst & Young. He literally got hit by a car in the middle of the city, and he just got up and started going. And the guy who hit him was like, "Where are you going? You gotta go to the hospital." He's like, No. I have an internship. I gotta get going. It's like, that is not normal, right? So, but this is what society is, and that they're trying. This is what it is. It's about getting us to have a working society, and that's it. But it doesn't stop us necessarily from going beyond that. But I'm going to try to explain that how the Torah really expects us to have a whole different outlook, and more to be above that normal, and to have that make your work special, and that even when somebody is working, it's not just a let's get through the basics, but it's really to enhance the whole experience and to make it a unique experience. So here's some examples, and you'll understand better what I mean as we go through. So the person, he has a worker that he comes to the house and he fixes whatever it is, roof, plumbing, etc. And the expectation is that when the person gives the bill, that the person is going to pay at some point. Right? They hope it's going to be within a timely manner. They would not be upset if they paid that week, 30 days. That's great. You paid within 30 days? We like you. If it takes you 6 months, not as happy, right? But part of business is really chasing down those people that aren't paying, right? As we've all had, forgot about that bill, right? So that person who sent out a letter again and again and again and again, that's part of what the expectation is. But the Torah really expects us and asks of us to do one step further. The pasuk says, you shouldn't treat your friend poorly in monetary matters. You shouldn't steal from them. You shouldn't have the money that is owed to the day worker with you until the morning. Meaning, you have to pay right away. Not next week, not even tomorrow. Today. When the worker is done, you pay. There's a great story that I read about Rabbi Elyashiv, one of the great rabbis of the generation. He passed away in 2012. It's amazing that's so far ago, but it seems like yesterday. But he had a worker who was working on his house. He lived in a house that needed a lot of work. It was in Yerushalayim before they even had plumbing. So you can imagine how much work needed to be done on this house over the years. And one day, sadly, I believe it was a family member, it might have been one of his children who passed away. And this worker finished what he was doing. And he said that make sure that this worker gets paid. He said, it may be that I'm in mourning and I have to go to the funeral, but that doesn't excuse me from making sure that my worker is paid right away. And that is the highest level of concept. Again, obviously, that's a very high level for a person to have on mind at all times, all of those different details. And it's not easy. It's not easy to get to that point, but that is the goal. And just to give a little concept of why, like some ideas behind the mitzvah, what we can connect to, the Sefer HaChinuch explains that HaKadosh Baruch Hu really wants people to be able to be alive and to thrive and do well. And when a person is unable to pay the bills that they need to pay and buy the things that they need to buy, it's extremely detrimental to them. And it really causes them to sort of lose that notch. They go down a notch, whether they can't pay for food, they can't pay for even their basic needs. It really, really hurts them in a serious way, whether it be physically they're hungry and starving, or if it's mentally, that they're thinking that they're not succeeding. Even sometimes that mental aspect can even have more of an effect than we really realize many times. Like, my wife being a nurse is sometimes, it's amazing, she'll talk about how a person who's in a good mood and in a positive light, even though they're really sick, but they do way better than somebody who is less sick, but in that negative mood. And that's because it makes an effect. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us as the Sefer HaChinuch to really pay immediately, because, as Chazal say, that even that small amount of money, people sometimes are willing to risk their lives to get that money. Just for example, building a skyscraper. Yeah, that's pretty dangerous to go up 1,000 feet in the air where you're hanging on by a string connected to whatever structure you're building. One small slip, even not 1,000 feet, if you're building a house and you're on the roof, or if you're 2 stories up, one slip and that's it, right? But that's the way it is. A person needs to make money. This is where their skills are, and that's where they use their skills to be able to make their money. So every single amount, that's helping them. So it says the Sefer HaChinuch, this is part of the concept, is that Hashem wants, the Torah is asking us to really make sure that we give each person what they need. And that demands that we don't hold back what they deserve, we give it to them right away. Another example of being sensitive to others is a concept called Dina de Bar Metzra, which means the law of the person who's your neighbor. We have to, just to give a little bit better context to it, we have to go back a little bit, because before the Industrial Revolution, most people were farmers. I think 80% of the population were farmers, and people, that is the way they survived. Because if they weren't a farmer, then they would have no land to be able to produce their food. So if I have a piece of land, and my neighbor has a piece of land, and I want to grow my farm, the best and most efficient way is to take over my neighbor's property. Because if I take the field next to that one, instead of just being able to do the plowing all in one shot, I have to plow this, stop, walk all the way around, move all of my equipment to the next field, and then continue plowing. So here the Chazal tell us that we need to think about the neighbor. And that is that if I'm going to be selling my property, I should think about the person next to me and say, you know what, maybe he needs it. Maybe it'll be beneficial to him, and therefore we have to mandate that he asks the person next to him and says, by the way, I'm thinking of selling. Do you want this property? And sometimes they can even stop a sale from happening if need be, right? Again, to go into all the details is beyond the scope of this, but the concept itself is extremely important. And even today, you could really apply this today as well. Somebody who has a business and they have, the apartment that's next to the other apartment in the building. And the other business is doing well, you're doing well, you decided that you're moving out, but maybe the guy next door, maybe he wants to buy the property and combine it into one big office. Maybe he wants to do that, or, in many ways that one could apply this. So instead, we could think that instead of offering it to the public first, or even a person when selling their house, maybe the person, I mean, here, you don't have this as much, I don't think, but in other places that I've been, where people buy multiple lots, knock them all down and make mini mansions. So if that's the thing that they do, so maybe, listen, I'm moving, but maybe he wants to build a mini mansion. Maybe I could offer it to him first, and that would be something that he would enjoy, right? So that is an idea that the Torah is asking us to do. Be extra sensitive to the person next to us, to think of them. It's not just about me. Okay, so another idea. So again, we have to be sensitive to others in at least two ways. We have to make sure that they get what they need right away, and we also have to think about things that could benefit them to push them forward. We also have to be extremely careful about our actions. That even the most minor little infraction could be extremely, extremely serious. The Torah says is that we shouldn't move the boundaries, right? Again, very applicable today, right? A person has a house. They have a property line. That property line is where your property is. It doesn't end 1 inch to the right, and it doesn't end 1 inch to the left. That is the boundary line, right? So this is what the Torah says, is that you should not change the boundaries in Eretz Yisrael where you have that property from your ancestry, because all Jews have their ancestral land in Eretz Yisrael, so therefore you can't change the ancestral boundaries. So the Sefer HaChinuch, again, he explains that you want to make sure that you don't change the boundaries, because what's going to end up happening is that there's going to be a mistake, and the person's going to say, "What are you talking about? That's not the boundary line. The boundary line is over here. That's really my property. It's not your property." So therefore, you want to make sure that you have your boundary lines correct. And this is an additional concept beyond just general stealing, because seemingly you should ask, "Well, excuse me, you're just stealing somebody's property." You're right, but the Torah went out of its way to apply an extra concept, to show that there's a whole different Isser, a prohibition here. They made a new one, just to show that this is exactly what we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about minuscule, inches that makes a difference. And it's not just, sometimes inches can be worth lots of money. Very interesting. I just read about Walt Disney. I just drove through it. It was so amazing to me how large this place is. But he bought it in a way that people wouldn't realize he was buying it. Because when he bought the land, it was $182 an acre, and he bought 30,000 acres, which is about the size of San Francisco. The minute that they realized, it went from $182 an acre to $80,000. That's what we're talking about. I mean, that's huge difference. Right. So again, when we're talking about borders between properties, it seems pretty obvious. It's like, what am I doing putting myself into his property? It's not mine. But it's not necessarily as easy when we think about how careful and sensitive we have to be with other people's things. For example, right, an employee, they work really hard, they have a major project, and of course the project has to be done by tomorrow. And, they did all their work. Later that night, the boss called them up after work hours and says, "There's stuff left on this project. I know you did what you need to do, but you gotta finish this. You gotta help us finish." So you're like, "Okay, fine, whatever." You spend 2-3 hours in the middle, on your free time, quote unquote, to finish this project, because it needs to be done tomorrow. Because if it's not done tomorrow, so that's a big problem for the company. So you do it, begrudgingly, but you do it. And now, the next day, of course, is April 15th, tax day. And you're like, now I remember what I was supposed to do last night in my 3 hours. I was supposed to print out my tax return to mail it in. Whoops, I forgot. And now, I gotta mail it in today. And I'm at the office, and I just spent 3 hours extra working on this project. No, what's the big deal? I'll make a 20-page copy. Each paper and ink is what? A cent? Not even. There's one problem, though, is that there's a big sign. It says, "No personal copies." It's not always so easy to say, okay, can I do? I'll have to wait till I get home, and maybe I'll miss the deadline of getting my taxes, right? Or even smaller. What about a paperclip from the office? Can I use a paperclip from the office? Am I allowed to look at my personal email on work time? All these things are extremely difficult. What about if my neighbor and me, we live so close together? I mean, here at Baruch Hashem properties are much bigger than that. But in New York, this is a very possible question. I mean, you can like touch the building next door when you reach out the window. I mean, sometimes, depending where you are. So let's say me and my neighbor decide, you know what, we're gonna get one Wi-Fi. We're just gonna get one Wi-Fi and we'll split it. Like, we do that? Again, I'm not coming here to answer any of these questions, but just the concept of how careful and where it can come out. An amazing story I heard from a rabbi in Israel. His name is Rabbi Rimon. Rabbi Rimon lives in Gush Etzion. He's very involved in a lot of areas of Jewish law, especially with the army. Many of the students from the yeshiva, the school over there, go to the army. And he was called by a soldier in Gaza, which is very rare. Usually soldiers don't have their phones, and if they do, then they're totally they're not usable. But this soldier, for whatever reason, needed his phone. And the problem was, the battery had died. So was he allowed to plug his phone into the Arab's house that he was in, who was living in Gaza, to charge his phone? He wasn't sure whether that was stealing or not. What an amazing question. I don't know what the answer was. He didn't tell. He didn't say. But wow, what an amazing question. How sensitive this person was. This is not my house. I may be here on security mission. Totally, nobody will know. It won't make a difference to anybody. They can even say Israel's giving them the electricity anyways. Like, you can make all the excuses. But he didn't. I don't know what he did at the end. I don't know whether it was permitted or not. But just the concept of how sensitive a person needs to be is really, really unbelievable. Right? And again, just because something is commonly done does not necessarily mean that it is okay. Obviously, the easiest case in many of these issues with work is ask. You have permission, so then fine. But the concept is what's very important. And when we do fulfill this to the fullest, so then it really creates a Kiddush Hashem, and really makes Hashem's name in the world better, and besides that, it just makes all of us better people, where it creates this amazing unity between all of us, where we're all looking out for each other, and we're all trying to do the best and what's best for, not only for ourselves, but also for each other. So, but again, as we mentioned, sometimes you have that boss, that boss, whoever that boss is. Man, that boss, he is just not nice. There's just nothing to say other than that. And he's just mean. And it's almost like life is not fair. Why do I have to submit myself to this kind of boss? I mean, I know you're a boss. But why do I have to submit myself to this? It's tough. It's really tough. So dealing with this question, I feel like we can also look to the Torah, and we'll see. We'll have, again, it doesn't make it easy, but at least we'll have an idea of what to do. And when we do, so then it will make dealing with all of these cases a little bit easier, I think. So first, what one really, really needs to know is that, as with anything, is whenever a person gets flustered and out of whack, now you're very, very likely to come to the wrong conclusion, because your mind is just not working straight. And it takes a lot to be able to realize that with oneself, that when one gets worked up, now my mind is not thinking straight. So dealing with these things and pre-thinking about them so that you're now prepared, okay, well, let's say this happened, let's say that happened, and I have a plan. I know what I'm going to do. So then that allows a person to really be on top of the situation and really come to a much better and more solid conclusion. So here's the story. This is what the Torah tells us. The Torah talks about a person named Yaakov, Jacob, right? Pretty well-known figure. And his boss was just about the worst boss you could possibly have. He had a person named Lavan, who happened to have been his father-in-law, and he was his boss. What was their relationship like? Well, let's start from the beginning. He meets this person, Lavan. He says, oh wow, Lavan, I really would love to marry your daughter, Lavan. He says, no problem. 7 years working for me. Yaakov says, deal. So what does he do? He works 7 years. Torah says he was working and he was absolutely, it's as if time flew by. No problem at all. 7 years, flat. And now it's wedding day. So he's waiting to get Rachel, and who was it? Leah. Lavan switched around. I mean, you couldn't get a worse start. Right? That's the beginning. So he worked 7 years. And now he has the wrong girl, and he's like, Lavan, what's going on? How'd you do that? He's like, yeah, we don't marry off the younger daughters first. We only marry the older daughters. He says, okay, fine. Well, can I at least have Rachel? He says, sure. Another 7 years. Yaakov says, okay. You know, he does that. I mean, this is pretty bad. Not only, I mean, you can only imagine what it was like in that house. You know, if they were around a Shabbos meal, like how that tension between Yaakov and Lavan and the daughters. I mean, you know, the guy worked 7 years. He was already, you know, I think he was old, right? He was looking to get married. And 7 years he goes by. And he worked diligently, and then he got swindled. Pretty bad. And then he had to work another 7 years to get the original wife. It's pretty bad. But don't worry, it gets better. After that, he says, okay, listen, you know what? I think it's ready. I think I'm ready to now start working for myself. I need to start building my own portfolio. So Lavan says, okay, no problem. They make a deal. So they make a deal, and you know, you're going to get these kinds of sheep, and I'm going to keep these kinds of sheep. And of course, throughout the 6 years that he was doing with this, Lavan changed the deal 100 times. Pretty bad boss, I would say. Like, you couldn't get worse. Not only is he a bad boss because he doesn't keep his word, he absolutely goes against himself multiple times. He is his father-in-law, which already, you know, creates some interesting vibes. Again, I love my father-in-law; he is the best. But I'm just saying, it's a different relationship than, you know, your buddy down the street, right? And having your father-in-law as your boss who's cheating you does not make it easy. Now, after all of this, Yaakov decides, you know what, I'm done. It's time for me to leave. His wives sign on the deal. They leave. They don't tell Lavan. They escape. Lavan is extremely upset by this, and he chases after them to get at Yaakov. But he was unable to. God stopped him. So what happens? Lavan says, listen, Yaakov, you stole my things. Yaakov says, go check. He checks. He finds nothing. Yaakov throws the book at him. He says, you looked through all of my things. You didn't find anything. You touched everything of mine. What did you find that was yours? Absolutely nothing. I worked so hard for you. I was out there in the blistering heat, in the freezing cold. I didn't let you lose anything. Any time that an animal of yours got wounded, I took it as a loss and I didn't give it to you. What do you want from me? What do you bothered me for all of these years for? He just literally threw the book at me. But what's incredible is that he didn't cheat him. In 20 years of working for Lavan, who was cheating him left and right, literally messed his life over. You could say pretty good, right? He was supposed to marry Rachel, he got Leah. Then he had to work another 7 years. I mean, that's a long time. He never cheated. And in fact, the Rambam says, when a person is working for somebody else, a person has to be extremely careful. Just like a rich person has to be extremely careful. Just like a poor person has to be extremely careful that he shouldn't steal from somebody else, even a tiny bit, right? We all have to be careful like this, and we have to work with kol kochi, right, with our entire strength. Just like Yaakov Hatzadik, says the Rambam, the Yaakov the righteous, and he said that I worked with my entire strength to serve Lavan. That's an amazing chart to really work in a proper way for other people. Because again, even, not to get into all the details, but there are 4 parts of the blessings for after the meals. And for somebody who's a day worker, today I don't know how applicable it is, because generally people won't mind if somebody works, sends another blessing for another few seconds. But in the old days, Chazal said you did not have to make the 4th blessing. in order to make sure that you are spending your time working for your boss. Because if you are on your boss's time, that is your boss's time, not yours, right? So therefore, says the Rambam, we have to do the same, and we have to work with our entire strength, just like Yaakov did. Okay, so when we understand that we need to put our full effort forward, and we also need to make sure that we have, we have to make sure that we only take what's ours and not what somebody else's, so then we'll be able to really deal with a lot of these issues that come up. Because when that situation comes up, we'll keep in mind. Listen, I don't know every boss, but Lavan's pretty bad. He's up there as one of the worst bosses ever. And if Yaakov, and it's not easy, but if Yaakov can weather it, and that's what we're asked to do, so then we can weather smaller things as well. Now, let's now talk about it practically. Okay, so now the case was a boss. He asked you to work extra time out of work hours to finish this project, and now I do need to make copies, even one copy where it says no copies. Am I allowed to take it? So really, if a person wouldn't have thought about this before, so then they might have just made the copy without thinking, because it's like, this guy's totally cheated me, I can take it. But now, the issue really at hand is there's a concept called taking the law into your own hands. Am I allowed to do that? Right? So he took from me hours of my life. That's worth money, right? Am I allowed to take that money that he took from me and sort of take it from him? So one example of Gemara, the Talmud in Bava Kama discusses that this concept of when a person is allowed to take the law into their own hand. So if there is a loss involved, the Talmud says that a person is allowed to take the law into their own hands. However, it's not really applicable in this case. Why? Because the Gemara elsewhere in Brachos explained what was the case in Brachos. The case was exactly this point. A little bit different though. In this case, the employee was stealing from the employer. So when you had a field, sometimes what they would do is they would hire a worker. It's called a sharecropper. The sharecropper would work on the field, and they would take a certain percentage of the crops as their payment. So this person, he decided whatever the percentage was. Let's say he decided he's going to take a third of the crops as my payment for working the field, and you, landowner, are going to get the other 2/3. So this sharecropper kept stealing from his employer, from the landowner, and he just kept stealing and stealing. The landowner got fed up. He stopped giving him certain things that he was rightfully due. And what happened is that his wine went bad, turned to vinegar. So the rabbis he went to the rabbis and he's like, what happened? They said, you must have done something wrong. He said, anybody who knows anything that I did wrong, come, tell me, what did I do? So they told him, listen, you stopped paying this sharecropper. He said, what do you mean stop paying? He steals from me every single day. They said, what does that have to do with anything? You can't steal from a thief. If you're stealing what the thief is owed, you're stealing from him. It doesn't matter that he stole from you. Right? Clear from this Gemara is that a person is not allowed to steal from a thief. It's very clear. If he is owed that, then that's that. He has to steal it. So what were we referring to that when a person can take the law into their own hands is referring to as mentioned elsewhere, that's referring to a specific item. Somebody stole an item of mine, and now it is sitting in their house. I know they stole it from me, and I see it right there. Am I allowed to take my item back? So there, the answer is there's going to be a loss to me by not having that item. I wouldn't be able to. But in the case of the sharecropper, or in our case, of the person who would work out of their work hours, there's no specific item. It's non-tangible, right? So therefore, they would not be able to do that. And besides, somebody suggested that when the employee does the overtime for the boss, they accept those consequences. They're saying, okay, I sign on to it. They could have said no, it would probably be a bad idea to say no in many cases, because then the boss says, okay, you're fired. You're sort of stuck in that situation, right? Again, it's not easy, right? But in a sense, the employee did kind of accept the consequences of the fact that they're going to have to do the overtime. So now, what we do see is that there is, though, even though there is an issue of stealing with a thief, it's not exactly necessarily the same. We see elsewhere that when somebody, in general, a person steals from somebody, in Jewish law there's a requirement to pay a fine, an extra fine for stealing, right? But if somebody stole something from a thief, a specific item, so then they would not have to pay that fine. But again, as that's mentioned everywhere, that's the ruling, but, that's only assuming that it's a specific item, and it's taken, and it's actually not the thief's. In Jewish law, there's a way for a thief to actually become the owner of the item. In a certain sense, because right, when a thief has an item, in a sense, it's his, but in a sense, it's not his. In a sense, it's his because he has total usage of that item. It's in his total domain. He has control. But the title is not in his name. So it's not his in that sense, but practically in the usage sense, it is his. So therefore, he's neither here nor there. But if there would be some sort of change to the item, right, so then it's not the same item anymore. And it doesn't fall under the title that it was before. So therefore, he can really become the owner of that. And then in that case, even though it originally came to the person through stealing, if a thief would take it from the thief, he would actually have to pay him that fine as well. Because then it became legally his in Jewish law. But again, this is all assuming that there is a specific, tangible, physical item here that I can take. And in our case with the employer, sadly that is not the case, right? And the person would not really be able to necessarily would not be able to make those copies, even though it is definitely not easy. And very, very difficult to surpass that challenge. So, in summary, we have really started with the concept of what is the idea of the Constitution in, again, I only looked in Florida, but I assume that many states are pretty similar. That the concept of the Constitution is really not to push one forward to go above, but rather to make sure that the status quo and people are happy and everybody can sort of retain those basic concepts of what they have. But the Torah is really asking us to really push forward to go beyond just the everyday normal. We want to make sure that people are paid on time to be able to make sure that they can get what they deserve right away, because you never know what's somebody's situation. And they could be in dire straits, and not giving them that money could be the difference between them paying their bills and getting food on the table to not paying their bills and not having any food on the table. Furthermore, we want to make sure that we're sensitive to other people to be able to help them grow as well. And we want to make sure that everybody has that opportunity. And when we ourselves are moving on, we want to make sure to offer to those who are around us. And we need to also consider the fact that even an inch outside of our property is still outside of our property. And although that sounds easier, but sometimes it can come really where we're in a really difficult situation, where we're really worked up because we had a really tough day, really tough boss, really tough, you name it. And it's just, even the smallest, minute, insignificant something could come up. Again, taking that paper clip from the office that I literally have no right to take, it's not mine, it's the office's. So am I allowed to do that? So the answer is that no. We would have to ask permission. You would have to get clear guidance from the employer on what's okay and what's not okay. And it's not always easy dealing with this, especially when we have a tough boss. And when you have that tough boss, it just makes it really hard. But when we look and we see how Yaakov, Avinu, and Jacob, he had that capability of really surpassing what is a terrible situation between him and his father-in-law, who's also his boss, and that we really have to keep in mind that we're trying to do above, not just the normal. And what's not mine is just not mine. So when we really cement that in our heads, then we can really surpass what would be the normal expected of what other people would think that person would be able to do. And in a legal sense, we have to know that there's a difference, even when one is allowed to take the law into their own hands. It's not talking about something intangible. It's only when some item was stolen from me that I could be able to theoretically take it back. But if it's not some theoretical physical item, there's really nothing to talk about, and that the person would not be able to do that. And the fact is that when I sort of signed on to the deal as an employee and I took those extra time, that difficulty, again, a person could always leave the firm. That a person can do. Every person has a right to leave their job. But that also comes with consequences. So when we do accept those things, it's really a difficult situation, but we hope that when we keep in mind all of these concepts, that we are not just trying to do to survive, to help other, just sort of get along and make it nice and pleasant, but rather really to try to elevate ourselves, where every single it really changes these challenges to tremendous opportunities, where we have that opportunity to step above and really gain for ourselves, to become better people and to create a much better situation. And we won't necessarily be in that dog-eat-dog where everybody's just trying to rip each other to shreds just to get ahead. Rather, we'll be in a much better situation.